Trust is everything in business. You trust your team to log in safely. You trust your systems to keep the wrong people out. And you trust that when someone or something connects, they are who they say they are. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most breaches happen because trust was misplaced. And that's why ISO 27001 Annex A8.5 exists, secure authentication. Its purpose? To make sure every person, every system, every service that touches your data proves their identity before they're granted access. Because in cybersecurity, belief isn't enough. You must verify. So what does the standard actually look for? Well, it states that secure authentication technologies and procedures shall be implemented based on information access restrictions and the topic-specific policy on access control. Notice here again, access control is really key to this. But in simple terms, this control ensures that access to systems, applications, and services is protected by strong, secure, and intelligent authentication. Now, it definitely links directly with Annex A.5.15 access control. That's your policy foundation, if you like. It also connects with Annex A8.3 information access restriction, defining where access must be limited. So together they form a kind of chain of trust. Annex A8.5 is the lock on that chain, providing that only the right key fits. So let's take a look at why this is important. What kind of stories can we give you that will bring this to life? Well, how about the senior executives' credentials that were phished? One click, one fake login page, no multi-factor authentication, and within hours, the attacker had access to emails, documents, and financial data. So one password, one mistake, one disaster. Or how about the online portal that displayed usernames on the login screen? A convenience for staff, but also a gift for attackers. When brute force bots saw that user not found, they simply moved on. When it said incorrect password, they knew they'd struck gold. Authentication isn't just about access, it's about not revealing clues. Or how about the more up-to-date risk that we all face, AI? A supplier's automated system connected to a client's network to run updates. And using AI tools, when the system certificate expired, the connection still worked. And no one noticed until a breach weeks later. Authentication isn't just for people. Remember that. It's for systems too. And increasingly in this day and age, it's for systems that use artificial intelligence. So what do we need to think about here? Well, just keep this in mind that Annex A8.5 exists to ensure that no one and nothing gets in unverified. And I keep laboring that word, verification, because as I said at the outset, trust without verification can lead you into hot water. And this applies to those users that you have, proving they are legitimate users, systems and services, proving they can be trusted, and messages and software, proving they haven't been altered. It's not about suspicion, it's about protection through proof. So what do you need to do around this particular control? Well, you need to choose the right technique. Authentication must match the sensitivity of what's being accessed. For routine access, strong passwords and multi-factor authentication, MFA, may suffice. For critical systems, you might want to think about using digital certificates, smart cards, tokens, or even biometric checks. For ultra-sensitive data, you would combine these factors. What you know, password, what you have, maybe a token, and what you are, biometrics. This really goes to the heart of what MFA is, multi-factor authentication. You also need to think about making it adaptive as well. Just think about context-aware authentication. If someone logs in from a new device, an unusual time, for instance, or maybe another country, maybe add an extra check. Security that adapts to risk keeps users safe without slowing them down. So if you suddenly get a login from a foreign country for your chief financial officer, and yet you know that just that very morning they were sat next to you, then maybe that's something that you would want to have your systems just to verify that this is indeed your CFO who has now jumped on a plane and flown 5,000 miles away. You also need to plan for the future. We are talking more and more about AI, artificial intelligence, but even things like biometrics now are fairly standard, but at one point they were the future. But just remember that AI, artificial intelligence, and biometrics can fail, especially biometrics. Think moisture, aging, or even injury. Always provide an alternative authentication method so that legitimate users aren't locked out. And design some smart login procedures as well. Remember, what we're trying to do here is make people's lives easier, not to the detriment of your security, but also if we put barriers in their way, they just simply will find ways around it. The analogy I always give is that people are like water in a river, and security is often like a rock, and people will find their way around it. So just think about designing smart login procedures and smart multi-factor authentication practices using some of the techniques I've already mentioned. But things like protecting users and systems from the moment they type their username really is critical. For example, don't reveal which part of the login failed. Don't show sensitive system information before the login. But you should display a general warning, such as authorized users only, or log all failed and successful attempts should be something that you do. You need to raise alerts on repeated failures and think about displaying the last successful login and any failed attempts as well. I would always suggest as well that you need to terminate inactive sessions after a period of time. Maybe if there is a lag of 10, 15 minutes, maybe then you terminate an active session and people will be required to log back in. And don't forget to use encryption as well on this particular control. Encrypt all credentials in transit. Remember, when we do talk about encryption later, we'll be talking more about encryption in transit and at rest. This is about encrypting those credentials in transit as they move from device through to the website, to the servers, etc. And block brute force attempts using captures or timeouts, for instance. It's these small details that separate basic access from secure authentication. And don't forget as well to keep it auditable. Authentication logs should tell a story. Who accessed what, when, and how. Because auditors will look for this trail, not to punish you, but to prove you're in control. So what other things will auditors be looking for? When they're reviewing this control, the auditors are going to want to see again a process is in place. For example, they'll want to start with the access control policy, and because it's mentioned within this particular control's requirements, and that's where it starts from. That's perhaps your foundation, your authentication foundation. From there, they're going to want to see some form of authentication information process, how credentials are created, stored, and protected. They'll want to see that you have access rights management in place. That's ensuring that permissions align with authentication levels. That goes back to the role-based access controls that we talked about earlier. They'll want to see that you have segregation of duties and that no single user can authenticate and authorize critical actions. Now, remember as well that this control isn't just about systems, it's about physicality of your site as well. So physical aspects. So they're going to look for physical entry controls. So on-site authentication should mirror digital access. Just think about the access into your organization. Who has the keys? Do they have PIN codes? So people are allowed into the organization with a RFID card, for instance, something that they have. But for critical access areas, such as server rooms, for example, they may require a RFID card, but also a PIN number and maybe even biometrics. Just think about multi-factor authentication, where it should be in place, both at the user level and at the system level as well. And the auditor is going to want to see that you've thought about this. And if you have any issues, any gaps in your thinking, of course, as ever, these things should end up on your risk register. They're also going to be looking for logs and monitoring, so making sure that you are logging any incidents, any issues, and that you will be alerted to any issues or any problems as well. Just remember that auditors love consistency, so show them that authentication is built on purpose and it's not just on a habit or on a whim. So what do you need to do? Well, first and foremost, I would always suggest that you go and check your access control policy. First of all, do you have one? And if you don't, then that's the first thing you need to go and address. But make sure that it also does reference and define different authentication types for different data classifications. Now, as ever, I am going to just pause here for a moment and just say to you, please don't overcomplicate your policy. You can point to other documents and other information that people should be aware of from an authentication perspective. So the policy doesn't need to become bloated. You can simply state within there that there are different forms of authentication and that they must be followed. And for additional guidance, people can go to a guidance page or to a procedure if that's necessary. But don't make your policy into bloatware. Make it relevant and snappy for people to be able to read. You also need to think about that multi-factor authentication in your organization. Again, remembering it's about people, it's about systems, it's about premises. So implement multi-factor authentication anywhere possible and speak to your teams about this. And I probably should have said earlier, when it comes to what the auditors are going to be looking for and what you should be doing is, of course, you should be training people on implementing multi-factor authentication, not just at work, but in their home lives as well. Encourage them to enable multi-factor authentication on their social media accounts, in their shopping, in their banking, because people who embody that behavior in their home lives are going to be much more likely to follow it into the business life, and therefore they'll understand why it's implemented within your firm and your organization. You should also think about, when you are doing this multi-factor authentication as well, is about using strong alternatives to passwords. Passwords they've been around for a long time, and there's much debate around the pros and cons of using passwords, but there are other simple tools that you can use, again, based upon the level of risk, based upon the sensitivity of information. But just think about smart cards, biometrics, or digital certificates. Just choose what fits your business and your firm. It has to be appropriate to you. I would also suggest that you build smarter login flows as well. So add captures, lockouts, login attempt logs, and inactivity timeouts, that kind of thing. And remember that this also, all of this applies equally to your third parties who may be providing systems to you as well. So make sure suppliers, APIs, and services authenticate securely before connecting as well. Because especially when you think about suppliers who may have unfettered access into your networks and into your systems, you want to make sure that the right people, again, are logging in at the right time. If you're MSP suddenly is logging in at 2 a.m. when that isn't a time when backups are running, or when any kind of patch management is being carried out, or any changes are occurring. If this is happening, you're only going to find out if you have logging in place, and you've got to ask yourself, have you got the right levels of authentication in place for that supplier, so that you can verify, that keyword, verify, that it is the actual MSP, your support. And don't forget, I've just mentioned it there, something that is really key is you need to monitor monitor what is going on. Set alerts for failed login attempts. And as I've already just said, those strange access times and any unusual patterns. But you can only do that if you have enabled some form of monitoring as well. So in closing, I'm just going to simply say this. Authentication isn't just about passwords. It's about proof. Proof that you know who's in your systems, proof that you know who are in your premises, proof that you can trust your connections and those people who are there, proof that your business values security as much as it values success. See, when authentication is strong, your business doesn't just block attacks, it builds trust. Because trust isn't about believing what people say, it's about verifying who they are every single time. So I hope that has been helpful. This is quite a deep area as we're getting into more of the technical controls now. As ever, we attempt as best as we can to simplify the complex aspects of information security. I'm Gary from Consultants Like Us, where we believe in compliance without complexity. Because in truth, security shouldn't slow you down. It should set you free. Now, if that does sound helpful, and if everything that I've just talked about is useful to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts around this particular topic. So leave me a comment. Do give me a like, give it a share, because as ever, you'll be helping me, and you just never know who you might be helping in your circle as well. Just remember that in today's world, it's not enough to believe people are who they say they are. You need to prove it as well. So until next time, stay well, stay safe, stay authenticated, stay connected. Take care. Bye-bye.